Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Good morning, and thank you for attending this virtual meeting of the Buffalo Niagara Partnership's Manufacturing Council. My name is Seth Piccirillo, Director of Economic Development here at the Partnership. Thank you for starting your morning with the BNP. Today's focus will be overcoming supply chain issues. That is a topic well known to all the council members, manufacturers, and businesses in attendance here today. The international media does not cover the global supply chain or any supply chain when things are going as expected or going well. But right now, it is obviously the major topic of conversation. COVID-19, global conflicts, labor shortages, these are just a few of the occurrences impacting the global economy and how we all do business. Isolated, each of these occurrences would be a major challenge. Combined at their current pace over the short time span of less than 3 years, they create a real inflection point for all manufacturers and businesses, regardless of size. Our conversation today welcomes experts with insights on how to strategize to meet this moment, what to look out for in the coming months and years, how to find solutions, and hopefully opportunities along the way. Before we introduce our guests today, let me thank our Manufacturing Council sponsors who make today's presentation and all of our work possible. Thank you to our title sponsor, Bank on Buffalo, industry sponsors, Harris BP LLC, National Grid and Quadrant Biosciences, and supporting sponsors, the Bonadillo Group and Remedy Intelligent Staffing. We are joined today by Michael Noah, president of our title sponsor, Bank on Buffalo. Mike is going to start our meeting out here today with a welcome. Mike, as always, thank you for being here today.
Seth, thanks for having me, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Manufacturing Council meeting for July. Again, my name is Mike Noah. I'm the president of Bank on Buffalo. Hope everyone's having a great summer so far. And just want to talk a few minutes this morning, give you a general market update on what we're seeing in the Buffalo region and in the financial industry as well. A quick update on Bank on Buffalo. We did open our 12th location in the past month, which we launched our Northland Workforce Training Center office. It's an investment in the east side of Buffalo, which we're very proud of, and it's a great partnership we've got with the training center. With respect to the economy, it's a pretty crazy time out there. We're seeing inflation, interest rates, supply chain issues, everything that we're going to talk about today, a big impact on all the clients that we have out there. The next Federal Reserve meeting is the 26th and 27th of July. Expectation is for another rate increase at that time, 50 or 75 basis points is what they're talking about. So, I mean, this year alone, in the last 4 months, prime's gone from 3.25 to 4.75. It's a 1.5% increase in a short period of time. Again, another 50 to 75 points expected here in July. And then 2 additional rate increases are expected in September and November. So you could be talking about a 7-month period there where rates have gone from 3.25 to 6.5, which is just an incredible amount in a short period of time. It's a blunt action the Fed's trying to do to try to fight inflation and to try to slow down the economy. With that, as you can imagine, loan rates have increased incredibly during that time as well for all borrowing vehicles. You'll expect to see banks now start to follow suit and bring some savings account rates up, but they're going to lag the market. Rates have been so compressed for so long that you'll start to see that happen. But again, it's going to be a slower process with no doubt about that. 10-year Treasury, it's been up as well, about 1.5% here in the last couple of months. Mortgage rates, for anyone that's trying to get a mortgage on the residential side, they're in the mid 5% range now. That's really double from where they were about 12 months ago. So again, another vehicle there to try to slow down the economy and slow things down in general. Activity from a real estate market that we're seeing developers still pretty active out there. And again, on the commercial industrial side, we're seeing some pretty good activity as well, but we are starting to see some signs of things slowing down and just certain projects not taking off at the time they're expected to. So we do expect things to slow down in the second half of the year here. And again, what the Fed continues to do will lead into that, of course. Our customers continue to battle supply chain issues. It's been an issue for the last couple of years, and it's not expected to necessarily slow down at any time. But they're fighting to try to find different ways to expand their network and get other ways to buy product and make their product as efficiently, as effectively as they can. So something that we expect will still battle for the rest of this year and possibly into 23 as well. And again, we're just trying to work with our clients on a day in, day out basis to make sure that we're there for them to get them what they need to get through these difficult times that they're facing right now. So that's a quick update on our end from a banking standpoint. Seth, again, I want to thank you and your team for having me this morning and wish everyone a great rest of the summer.
Mike, thanks so much for that timely update. Inflation, it was part of the conversation that we're going to have later on. So really appreciate that information and all the support from Bank on Buffalo. Thank you. So today's conversation is broken up into two different parts, a presentation and a panel discussion. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Nallan Suresh, who is coming in live from Singapore today. And then a really robust panel that has some experts that we can talk this issue through. Starting with Dr. Suresh is the UB's Distinguished Professor in the Department of Operations Management Strategy in the School of Management. He's also the Associate Director of the Still Institute for Sustainable Transportation and Logistics at UB. He specializes and been widely published in supply chain management, manufacturing, global logistics, and international trade. Dr. Suresh will be joined on our panel by David Galante, VP of Speed Global Services, Mike Durkin, President of Kobe Inc., and Jack Ampuja, President of Supply Chain Optimizers. A little information about our panel. Dave Galante brings over 20 years of logistics experience to this conversation and currently oversees Speed's global operations as well as sales division. Speed Global Services represents a full service supply chain solution for domestic and global companies requiring freight shipped anywhere in the world. Dave's expertise and over 20 years experience has been critical, especially in the last few years, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mike Durkin is president of Kobe Inc., a global designer and manufacturer of customized module lubrication, compression, and conditioning packages for the oil and gas, power generation, and air separation industries. And Jack Ampuja is president of Supply Chain Optimizers, a management advisory firm founded upon the principle of taking waste out of the supply chain. Jack brings over 30 years of management experience with 5 Fortune 500 companies, as well as being published and being involved in the academic world as well. You will see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to ask any questions there. We're going to get to as many of them as possible in the Q&A. If you see a question that's already been asked that you like, please hit that like button and it will get to the top of the list. A couple of just quick and timely updates. We have some really important events coming up. We encourage everyone to go to thepartnership.org and the events page to keep up to date. One that is important to the supply chain issue, we know that labor shortages plays a part in the challenges in the supply chain, and we are going to be having a virtual event on July 28th. I'm going to talk a little bit about it more in a moment, focused on helping companies, regardless of the work that they're doing, to attract and retain talent using our network of partners and also very current and helpful content to attract job seekers. Other events, we have Unawareness, the current threat of landscape for cybersecurity on August the 3rd, and creating a positive work environment on August the 9th. So we encourage everyone to go to partnership.org, take a look at all of our events and content there. The summer does not slow down government advocacy. There is many different topics at all levels of government that are important to this conversation, manufacturers and businesses as a whole. So we are excited to welcome in Josh Veronica, our Manager of Government Affairs and Economic Development, to give us an update on what's going on. Josh, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Seth. Good morning to all of you. Thanks for starting your day with us. I want to give you an update on some of the issues in the government space that we're tracking right now. The first is unemployment insurance. Increased UI rates are coming soon to your business. We've been talking about this for over a year. This should not be anything new to you if you've been on these calls in past quarters. So as you know, New York State took a loan to finance the unemployment system during the pandemic. Now they want you to pay the bill. The state comptroller recently released a report on this issue back in June. He said the state still holds an $8.2 billion loan balance. Unless the state acts immediately to pay that off, the comptroller warned that employers will see their UI premiums increase anywhere from 30% to 182%, depending on your size and based on what you're paying before. But this is unacceptable. You did not cause the increased use of unemployment during the pandemic, and you shouldn't have to pay for it all. Through the American Rescue Plan, that was the federal stimulus package, New York got about $13 billion in aid from the federal government. So we called on the state to use some of those funds to pay off the debt and avoid this crisis. 21 other states have taken that exact approach, and they've avoided this problem. But for whatever reason, New York has not. This week, some members of the Assembly majority including Monica Wallace, Pat Burke, Karen McMahon, and Bill Conrad, finally called for some action on this issue, but it might be too little too late, especially since the legislature just ended a special session without really addressing the issue. So prepare for those increases to come. Do not be caught off guard by higher UI bills. And when those bills come, please communicate with us. We want to know how much more you're paying so that we can share your stories with lawmakers and hopefully force some action on this issue. The next issue I want to talk about is USICA. So the BNP and the Great Lakes Metro Chambers Coalition have been advocating for the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, also known as the COMPETES Act. This bill would make significant investments into research and technology and also create a few regional tech hubs. Senator Schumer has promised to use his leverage to locate one of those tech hubs here in Western New York if this legislation passes, which would be great for our regional economy and for this industry in particular. In May, Grant Loomis from our team went to Washington with the Great Lakes Metro Chambers to advocate for this legislation. However, it appears like it's on thin ice at this point. Last week, Senator Mitch McConnell said he was not willing to consider this legislation as long as Democrats were also considering a reconciliation bill, which would fund Democrats' climate and social priorities, and they could do so without needing any Republican support. So since McConnell took this position, passing USICA through the Senate would require either 10 Republican senators to disobey McConnell or require the Democrats to scrap the reconciliation bill, neither of which is likely to happen before the midterms. Even if it does pass the Senate, Speaker Pelosi just said yesterday that House leadership has significant issues with the Senate version. So we see this working out in one of two ways. Either the bill doesn't move at all this year, or Congress kind of passes a watered down version of USICA that just makes some targeted investments in semiconductor manufacturing. But we will keep you posted on any updates out of Washington. Next, I want to move to Albany. As you know, the state legislature finished its 2022 session in June. They passed a number of problematic bills that are now sitting on Governor Hochul's desk. We have expressed our opposition to these bills to the governor and asked her to veto them. So I'll walk through what some of those are. First is workers' comp reforms. There are a handful of workers' comp bills that passed this year. One would force workers' comp to cover PTSD coverage for any work-related stress. So this was traditionally for just police officers and firefighters. This bill would expand coverage to all workers experiencing any work-related stress. One would provide workers' comp coverage for massages. One would increase the minimum workers' comp benefit and index it to average wages in the state, meaning the minimum would constantly rise. There are a few more bills like these. I won't go through all of them, but the net result will be that employers are forced to contribute more to the workers' comp system to finance these new expanded benefits. And we have raised our concerns about these to the governor. Next bill is on citing. One bill would mandate that the DEC cannot issue or renew permits for facilities that contribute either directly or indirectly to a disproportionate or inequitable pollution burden in a disadvantaged community. So what does that mean? Let's say you have a factory located in a low-income neighborhood or in a neighborhood that has been previously adversely affected by pollution. Your factory makes some noise that the surrounding community can hear, or maybe it emits an odor that the community can smell. This law would classify that noise as a pollution burden, meaning that alone could block the DEC from renewing any of your permits. This bill defines both disadvantaged community and pollution rather loosely, so it's hard to know where you could actually operate. This bill is very poorly written. We don't think the legislature really realized just how aggressive and wide-reaching this bill would be when they passed it, but it's very problematic. And we have kind of walked through our case against this to the governor and asked her to veto that bill. And we will keep you posted because we really think this could have a pretty significant effect on all sorts of industries across New York State. Pay ranges. There is one bill that would require you to list pay ranges in all of your job listings. You would also have to keep records on pay history for each position within your company. Cryptocurrency. For those not familiar with cryptocurrency, any cryptocurrency transaction requires validation through a process referred to as crypto mining. The process itself is not important for this conversation, but basically mining requires the use of many high-powered computers, which also requires significant loads of energy. The legislature was concerned about the crypto industry's impact on the climate and on the electric grid. So the legislature passed a 2-year moratorium on crypto mining while it studies how to best regulate that industry. The BNP has opposed this bill, and Governor Hochul has not really taken a firm position one way or another on this. We have the Warehouse Workers Act. So if enacted, this bill would really micromanage warehouse work, specifically in warehouses that use work quotas. So you would be required to provide a written description of any quota to which a worker is subject, such as tasks to be performed or materials produced. The description must also list any possible consequences for missing a quota. And it says that employers cannot use quotas that prevent employees from taking the rest periods or bathroom breaks. No idea how that's defined, but basically, if they think it's too demanding, that can be struck down. Lastly, this bill would require significant record keeping. You would have to keep speed data on your employees, both individually and on the aggregate. And current and former employees would have the right to request this data. So this bill would apply to any individual warehouse with over 100 employees or with 500 total in warehouses across the state. We have asked for a veto on this, but our understanding is that Governor Hochul intends to sign this legislation soon. And diversity reporting. So currently employers or federal contractors with over 100 employees need to submit an EEO-1 form to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This form reports demographic information on your staff, race, ethnicity, sex, and job titles. So New York State passed a bill that would also require you to submit that same information to the state, but it takes it a step further. The state would then publish that info on their website, so anyone in the world could see your company's demographic makeup. This could be used in pressure campaigns and in ESG scores. And so we have asked for a veto on this bill because we are concerned that it really sets up businesses for undue criticism, especially when that data is presented without context. So those are some of the state issues that we are tracking. Lastly, I'll finish with a Climate Action Council update. So we've spoken at length on these calls about the Climate Action Council's draft scoping plan. The public comment period for that plan closed on July 1st. The BNP submitted both oral and written testimony, and we also coordinated an online campaign through Voter Voice. Through that campaign, over 2,100 grassroots comments were submitted to the state, voicing concerns about that plan. So we thank all of you on this call for your participation in that effort. So what happens next? The council is tasked with reviewing all of these submitted comments and hopefully adjusting their plan. That final scoping plan will be released by January 1st. So once the final plan is out, the implementation phase begins. This will happen both through agency regulations and through legislative statute. Either way, this is going to be a major focal point for us over the next 2 years, because if the final plan looks anything like the draft scoping plan, we know that every aspect of our economy will be touched, and we are preparing to advocate accordingly. So those are some updates from the government affairs side of things. Seth, I'll turn it back to you.
Josh, thank you so much for those updates. And this is a reminder, we will make sure to share a link to the recording in this slide deck with all the members afterwards. So another quick update from the Employ Buffalo Niagara side. On all of these meetings, we talk in all of our really communications and newsletters, we talk about Employ Buffalo Niagara, how important the work that we're doing in workforce attraction and retention. I want to touch on this briefly. I mentioned the July 28th webisode on career pathways. It is a free event. We'll send the registration link to everyone. It'll be another opportunity to learn more about what Employ Buffalo Niagara are doing and focusing specifically on career pathways. We are continuing to grow that program of creating a career pathway for specific jobs at participating companies, showing what a job seeker needs to get into the door and what they can do to have specific benchmarks over 5 years within your company. So not just theoretical, but saying, in their first 5 years of employment, here's what is possible for me to create a career. Everything that we're doing in career pathways is based on some extensive workshopping and focus grouping we've done over the last couple of years. We want to make sure that we show this tool to all of our members, especially focusing on manufacturing, because we continue to work with more educational workforce development partners and continue to add web resources, which we want to make sure that we go over with everyone. So while you're taking a look at the event, if you go to the Employ Buffalo Niagara section of our website, again, which we'll link to everyone, take a look at the career pathways. You can look at our growing library of completed pathways including very straightforward job descriptions. And we look forward to discussing this more on the 28th, and we encourage everyone to register. So moving on from the updates, we are excited to welcome in Dr. Nallan Suresh. We say good morning from Western New York, but also good evening because he is coming in from Singapore. And he is going to discuss his take on overcoming supply chain issues and redesigning supply chains for greater resilience. Dr. Suresh, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Seth, and special thanks to Buffalo Niagara Partnership for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, especially in the company of eminent panelists, Mr. David Galante, Mr. Mike Durbin, and Mr. Jack Ampuja. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And next slide, please. Okay, a quick agenda. We are just coming out of COVID-19. Hopefully, we've learned a lot of lessons coming out of COVID-19. What are the kinds of things that we need to do? Specifically, what should we do to diversify our supply chains going forward, et cetera, and what are the things that we should be doing in the short term, and what are the things that we need to be doing in the long term? That is basically what I'm going to talk about in this 10 minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think all of us are agreed that we are entering a period of unknown unknowns. It's becoming increasingly problematic trying to predict what's going to happen next. Like same time last year, who could have predicted that Russia is going to invade Ukraine, for instance? And yeah, so we are entering that a period of uncertainty, and our disruptions seem to be increasing in magnitude. And that's the kind of environment going forward that we need to design and operate our supply chains. So the question of the day is, what are all the kinds of things we need to do to have more robust and resilient supply chains? So the next event could be an asteroid hit, for instance, who knows? Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so as we recover from COVID-19, there has been an across-the-board increase in consumer demand. But the problem is, so initially, several months before, we were very optimistic that the economy is going to grow and we're going to come out of COVID, big, et cetera. Unfortunately, we woke up to lots of constraints on the supply side. There are lots of constraints in producer nations like China and Vietnam. They're still struggling with COVID breakdowns. All the major production facilities and also the major ports in China, the Ningbo, Jiaoshan, and Yangshan, all the big ports are still disrupted by COVID-19, et cetera. So all these constraints on the producer nations, and then also these constraints in the consumer nations, starting with the congestion in the West Coast ports like Long Beach and so on. All kinds of disruptions are taking place. And now we have lots of these Omicron variants still ravaging the planet and so on. So that's the kind of problem. So we've got lots of constraints on the supply side. And with all these constraints, we now have this threat of inflation that has increased our input costs and so on. So next slide, please. So now we have made lots of advances over the years. Now the food supply chain, the American food supply chain it's looking back, which we have always taken that for granted, but the American food supply chain is a miracle by itself. All these years, we were getting affordable, plentiful supply of food, great deal of variety, et cetera, et cetera. And over the years, we've become leaner and leaner. Our inventory turnover ratios have been growing. We've become very efficient, et cetera. And now in retrospect, it looks like we've become a little too lean. It has come at the expense of flexibility and agility. Now we are taking a fresh look at lean, et cetera. And so now around 10 years ago, we learned to cope with hurricanes, like coming out of Hurricane Katrina, et cetera. We learned to cope with those kinds of events, but pandemics have tended to be completely different, much more global in scope. And COVID woke up to new realities and all the big weaknesses that we have in our supply chains. Next slide, please. So we have learned a lot of lessons from COVID-19, I think, especially how to handle panic buying on the part of consumers, how to forecast better, how do we operate better, how better socially distanced workforce, safer work practices, work from home routines, lots of lessons I think we have learned from COVID. But the big lesson or the big weakness that is COVID has exposed to us is the big need to diversify our supply chains. And that's going to dominate our agenda in the future, I think. Next slide, please. So in the short run, we are going to be preoccupied with coping with some crisis or the other. We are going to be addressing some supply chain bottleneck or the other, but without getting distracted from the short-term crisis, we must, I think, continue with the agenda of diversifying the supply chain. We should not forget the overall agenda. And in the short run, it seems to me that we should be doing at least 5 different things. The first, of course, we need to do a good job of managing the day-to-day crisis. Right now, the chip shortage and the semiconductor chip shortage has exposed that the over-dependency on Taiwan, the over-dependency on that one company, the TSMC, etc. Our supply chains are in several places in our supply chains. There is over-dependence on some key suppliers, or over-dependence on geographical concentrations, etc. Those are the kinds of things we need to address in redesigning our supply chains. Secondly, even as we do that, we need to find new ways of coping with inflation. Now the input costs are rising, that we need to compensate for that by reducing our operating costs. We need to increase our processing efficiencies. We need to reduce our operating costs in order to compensate for the rise in the input costs. Only then we can survive in this change. So that is another second challenge, the coping with inflation through better operational efficiency. Next slide, please. Now, the third thing that we need to do is looking at our supply chains structures. We need to very systematically cultivate agility in the supply chain. That means every one of us, every employee in every company need to be a little more forward-looking. We need to look for better ways of mitigation and also come up with better procedures for faster response, both mitigation and response. We need to address it very systematically by taking a look at our supply chain maps and see which are the most vulnerable points in the supply chain, etc. Now, all these years, in order to pursue economies of scope and economies of scale, we tended to concentrate production in certain areas, etc. So that is something we need to do. Next slide, please. So we need to be more forward-looking. We all know Murphy's Law, but we need to operate like as if Murphy was an optimist. That's the kind of attitude we need to cultivate. That culture of agility and flexibility is the dominant culture for the future. Next slide, please. So we need to, fourthly, we need to do a better job of risk management, business continuity planning, etc. We have got supply chain risk can take place in all segments of the supply chain, on the supply side, internally, on the demand side, and geopolitically, at the environmental side. We need good mitigation and fast response. Next slide, please. So we have, over the years, we have developed many good risk management tools and techniques, which I think we need to be using more systematically. We have developed, for example, failure mode and effects analysis, all kinds of good tools and techniques, which I think we also need a lot of stress tests. Like the banking industry does a good job of using stress tests and simulations. Likewise, we also need to conduct fire drills in our supply chains. Those are ways of cultivating agility in supply chain. Next slide, please. So those are the 5 or 6 things we need to do in the short run. Of course, even in the short run, we should be thinking about diversifying the supply chains. Now, in the long run, we need to create supply chains that are more based on ethics and democratic values. We also need to redesign our supply chains in such a way that they are in sync with all the new alignments that are taking place. For example, one new alignment is the Quad. That means the USA, Australia, Japan, and India coming together. So we need to redesign the supply chain in sync with all these geopolitical realignments that are taking place. Of course, our supply chains also have to be more based on circular economy and so forth. And we need to strive for greater self-reliance. Now, here in Singapore, they have this plan called 30 by 30. That means by the year 2030, at least 30% of all the food supply chains must be produced locally, etc. So likewise, in India, they call it Atma Nirbharat. And so that philosophy of self-reliance is become a national goal for pretty much every country, and we need to do that as well, with a sense of urgency. And those are some of the things we need to long run. Basically, we need to pursue this. Next slide, please. So in the long run, we need to, this unequal trade relationship with China that we've been having during the last 20, 25 years is not sustainable anymore. This is the next slide, please. And the world is changing. These are the new G7, G8, etc. And our supply chains also will realign along these lines. Next slide. Okay, so the last bullet point here, we need to continue with this agenda of diversifying supply chains with a sense of urgency. And that's the thing we need to pursue in the long run, it seems to me. We may not be able to predict the next event, but we can at least predict the consequences proactively. Whatever happens, certain nodes in the supply chain are going to fail, certain arcs in the supply chain are going to fail. We need to have mitigation and fast response procedures. Even if we are not able to predict the next event, the consequences at least can be predicted somewhat. And we should go on in that, it seems to me. I look forward to the opinions of the other panelists and also the audience. Thank you very much.
Dr. Suresh, thank you so much for that. That's a really good insight and a jumping off point, especially that urgency point as we get into our panel. And he's put his contact information up here. So thank you very much for getting this conversation going. And again, we will share all the slide deck with everyone in the follow-up email. We're going to get into our panel discussion, which we're very excited for. Dr. Suresh is going to stay with us. We're also going to welcome in David Galante, who is Vice President of Speed Global Services, Mike Durkin, who is President of Kobe Inc., and Jack Ampuja, President of Supply Chain Optimizers. Good morning, everybody. And also, as a reminder to everyone, you have the Q&A function here at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in questions for the panelists, and we will get to as many of them as time allows. We're going to get right into it. We have a couple of conversation starters here, and I want to start with Dave Galante. So obviously, there are many things that are going on: pandemic, global conflicts, trade sanctions. But these aren't the first versions or occurrences of any of these things. Again, they're all coming together at once, but they aren't new. Like the asteroid coming in, that would be new. Based on your experience, what occurrences in the past can we learn from, especially as we try to forecast and recover from what's going on now?
I think some of the things that we do see, obviously this is unprecedented. I mean, you have issues and challenges, whether they're weather related or a terrorist act or what have you, but they're short-lived. This is an elongated process that's still continuing, as much as we don't see it here in the States with COVID as much. It's still a challenge in China. Some of the ports are just opening back up again. So really having delays. Really diversifying is Dr. Suresh had mentioned, diversification of your supply chain it's really critical. A lot of clients of ours had traditionally single sourced their forwarder, and not every forwarder is excellent in every lane. It's the equivalent here locally of, you shop at Wegmans or Tops. Some people like going for one or the other here locally. But one might have better produce than what have you. So I just really tell our clients to really explore what's out there. And one provider may be excellent coming out of Europe versus out of China, and to really look at that. And we see it quite a bit. Customers are opening up and having more honest communication with what their needs are and some of their challenges, where before I think is kind of held in tight. But I really think the diversification is a critical component.
That's a great point. Let's take it to the everyday impacts. Mike Durkin, Kobe is in the global market there. You're making, manufacturing, fabricating. Tell us a little bit about what the supply chain challenges, and more specifically, even inflation, how is that impacting your day-to-day operation?
Significantly. Raw materials and component part delays, the expense of parts and how they're increasing almost daily. They're causing us to react in ways that we haven't had to before. In most cases, our ability to successfully navigate these issues are the deciding factor for either winning or keeping customers. Our supply chain company, the companies in our supply chain are some of the most sophisticated production outfits in the world. So when their approach to lean manufacturing or just-in-time approach to production is interrupted, our business feels those reverberations almost immediately. The impact of inflation, for us particularly, we're fixed price contracts. So, we're booking work that we're not delivering until maybe 12 months from now. So when we get into the design and engineering process, ultimately, if we continue to see inflation like we have been, I think we just saw the numbers where year over year inflation is like 9+% from from June of last year. Those are significant impacts that we have in our business and our industry. On a daily basis, we've gotten to having a robust progress reporting system for all high risk and long lead orders to verify schedules and to make sure that things stay on track. But even in doing so, it's not always enough. We're continually trying to find new avenues to do better and to find additional companies to add to our supply chain to mitigate that risk that we've been talking about as we identify those. But we get into on a daily basis, nuances of orders that we never have had to before. The days of putting something on order and expecting it to show up as promised are long gone. We get into details now of not only just expediting, but getting into trying to help our suppliers navigate what port to bring components into to try to mitigate risk of things getting held up there. So there's additional complexity that we've never had to really get into before, but it's part of our day-to-day lives at this point.
And that goes to that ongoing theme of diversification that we're hearing today. Jack, next one's for you. So, a lot of what we do is partnership. We do a wide range of advocacy, all levels of government. This is impacting every national, international government that there is. What do importers, exporters, trading companies, logistics providers, if they're having a conversation with their governments, what do they need right now? And what do you see them needing in the next 6 months to a year to help mitigate some of these issues? I think you're on mute there.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back to Mike Durkin's comment about the port situation. That's an area that I think governments can really help, is to make sure that the ports are moving, that we've got adequate labor. One of the big issues that's on the horizon right now is that the labor contract for the international longshoremen on the West Coast, and they control, I think it's 29 ports that labor does, from Mexico all the way up to Vancouver, including Hawaii. Their labor contract expired July 1st. So they're working day to day. Both sides have said we're progressing with the talks. There will not be any stoppage, but I don't know if anybody believes that in the trading business, because there's been bad blood there for a long time, very negative situation. To me, it's extremely disappointing as a taxpayer and a resident in this country to watch the federal government in this situation say, we will get involved if necessary. Well, we're already 2 weeks beyond the expiration of the contract. When are you going to get involved? After we have a strike? Wouldn't it make sense for somebody from the federal government to sit down with both sides? They're kind of watching from a distance, saying it's going okay. It'll look okay until the problem blows up. So it's that kind of a situation where I'm not a huge fan of government interference. I don't think anyone on the Manufacturing Council is, but there are times when the government needs to get involved and to have the port situation flowing properly, try to cut some of the red tape, make sure that we're not adding more regulation that would slow things down and to raise costs. That's where the government can be helpful. And certainly the state government with the Port of New York, New Jersey, that's front and center. One of the biggest ports in this country, we need government help there just to make sure that things are flowing right and that they don't hurt the situation.
That's a good point. We want partnership in government, especially getting through these major hurdles. Dr. Suresh, one for you. You mentioned something, a fire drill, stress testing during your presentation. We are a group of manufacturers in a regional business community. Are there ways for us to work together to coordinate stress testing that would be valuable, even if it's across manufacturing or business types? Have you seen other places work on a regional basis to try to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we supply chain folks have a lot to learn from the banking industry on this. I've not seen any company that's doing stress tests for its supply chain, etc. That is something we need to learn from the banking industry. The banking industry, it's actually mandated as part of the stress tests, and I've not seen it. That is something we need to do more.
And maybe that
learn from the banking industry. Yeah,
maybe that's a conversation that we can regionally help facilitate.
absolutely.
Dave, we'll go back to you. A good conversation from the chair of our manufacturing council, Scott Pallotta from Zender Rittling. So diversification, which we're talking about, makes sense for large manufacturers, high volume. What about smaller manufacturers that might not be able to have the ability to have multiple suppliers? Is there other ways for them to achieve a smaller scale diversity?
I think there are. I think that there's co-loading opportunities if they're not bringing in large full container quantities. There are opportunities to do that. Different forwarders have different strengths or lanes that they run consistently. It's challenging. We've got a lot of our clients, honestly, that are looking at doing some more nearshoring versus trying to always rely on China and pulling goods out of there where there is a real backup. To try to look at Canada, look at Mexico, look at things that are closer that don't have the severe backups that you have today, coming all the way across, from China, where historically it was 30 days, pretty regimented process of 30 days of getting a container here. Now we're seeing 45, 75 day times, sometimes even greater than that, if you can find capacity on the vessels coming in. So there isn't just one. I don't think there's a magic bullet here. I think that there's just a lot more entailed to finding that right solution for you. It's not just we'll get it from China and that's it. I think there's just really opens. I think it's open. Hopefully, it's opened a lot of people's eyes and really looking at different things, especially from the purchasing standpoint, of people just looking at different opportunities.
It's like we said, it's that major inflection point. Hopefully, people use it as an opportunity to reevaluate a lot of different things. Mike, I want to go back to you. So obviously, in manufacturing, there's always going to be the hands-on analog portion of the work, but also supply chain relies on the digital component as well. Have you seen over the last couple of years, have you changed, or are you looking at different types of digital tools to help with supply chain management, especially now if you're looking at different suppliers that might be new to your supply chain? Are you looking at any new tools that might be valuable to other companies as well?
For sure. As we fit in the supply chain, and not only evaluating the supply chain that we utilize, but how we kind of fit overall into the broader picture. COVID was kind of a tectonic shift in how we approached the use of technology and in some of the digital resources at our discretion, to include the ability to reach really around the world to do inspections, to do commissioning support, to utilize video and some of the technology that was in place that allowed businesses to survive COVID to now perpetuate the business and grow our business. Along those lines, there's a lot of emphasis put on, with the delays that we've been seeing in our supply chain, of kind of staying on top of things and staying in tune with your supply chain to make sure that people are performing. So we've been utilizing a lot more of digital media primarily. So in terms of getting updates and getting videos and having people go out onto their shop floor and take their iPhone with them and not only just send us an email saying, yeah, things are on track, but show us, prove it to us. Those have been things that have been implemented kind of regularly that were not really in existence, 3 to 5 years ago. In terms of kind of new things on the horizon, artificial intelligence is one that continues to kind of come up, and I don't know that I've seen it implemented fully or to its potential, nearly to its potential, but having AI involved where you have order processing, handling, and then monitoring and ultimately fulfillment, and not necessarily rely on people connecting all those dots, but when you have a network that allows for shifts when there's disruptions, I think that's going to be a huge part of what goes forward, is having integrated systems across either states within a country or across countries and across the world that speak to each other and allow for those kind of shifts on the fly as necessary.
That's a good point. I mean, COVID has changed how we all use video, so especially those visual video updates along the supply chain make a ton of sense. We have a question here that I'm gonna hand over to Dr. Suresh from Alan Ray, one of our presenters here at Manufacturing Council this year. Lean and agile are two philosophies that are often in conflict. How do we reach a balance and control costs?
That's a great question. That's something which a lot of people are trying to grapple with. Now, our overall objective should be lean, of course. We have to eliminate waste wherever possible. Nobody can dispute that. At the same time, the pursuit of leanness should not come at the expense of agility. For example, if you have over dependence on certain suppliers, over dependence, geographical dependence, etc. Those things were done in pursuit of lean. Actually, this over concentration of production those things happened because you wanted to consolidate in production. You get economies of scale, and that reduces the cost. We've been pursuing lean relentlessly, but what we're saying is, but there are parts in the supply chain where you can afford to have inventory buffers, some extra capacity, etc. Even though your overall philosophy is lean, in certain critical places in the supply chain, we should, I think, we should have backup suppliers. We should have inventory buffers, even though that goes against the leanness, etc. And also coming back to this question, there was a time when we used to call it Toyota production system. Now, in the Toyota production system, there are lots of elements of flexibility and agility. For example, the quick changeovers, the single-minute exchange of dies, those are all flexibility oriented. But those things took a backseat. We started calling it lean, and we forgot things like flexibility and agility are also very much part of the Toyota production system. Those things took a backseat when we started calling it lean, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so today what we're saying is we should pursue lean as the overall objective, but not at the expense of losing our resilience and supply chain. I hope I answered Mr. Nallan's question.
No, thank you. And you bring up a follow-up question that I'm gonna hit in a minute. Want to send one to Jack here. So we've talked about potential for our group, Buffalo Niagara manufacturers, to work together. Even if it is cross-sector, do you see new opportunities for collaborations, whether that be setting up alternate supply chains, purchasing? Do you see an opportunity for collaborations for regional companies to work together to overcome some of these issues?
I think that some of the comments that Dave Galante made earlier are right in that vein. That if you don't, it's relatively easier, a lot easier if you're the size of a Nestle or a General Electric. You're a huge company. You're going to get a lot of attention. You've got a lot of clout. If you're a local manufacturer, local company, one facility, you're not going to be high on anybody's radar screen. So what do you do to overcome that? That's the basic issue. It always is for smaller firms. So the answer is let's join together and see what we can do en masse instead of individually. And that's where I think a group like the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, that's obviously why the BNP exists, is to take all of these things and to provide clout and information. And so the same way with the supply chain, that Is there an opportunity for group buying? David mentioned co-loading, for example. Can be very different kinds of companies, but it means investigation. It means sharing some information, looking for opportunities, it means openness, which isn't always the way business thinks. So it just says that the opportunity is there, but it's going to take some additional mining and looking for opportunity, and then willingness to try things instead of saying, oh, that won't work.
I think that's, disruption is the word that's used a lot. Hopefully our perspective is, how can we use this disruption to add value as a group? Maybe this accelerates something that would have happened already. We've seen that time and time again. Maybe this is an acceleration that we can work together on some consortium-based improvements. Speaking of buzzwords, resiliency is one that's often used in this conversation. I want to open this up to everyone, starting with Dave. In the next couple of years, what does supply chain resiliency mean to you or look like to you?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of, the pandemic, I think, has really been an elongated stress test, I think, for our people and our staff and our company to really see, to have a step back look at how, I know the doctor mentioned, value streaming and the 5 whys and his, to really look at what you're doing in your business and to see if you have the right people in the right areas, you're staffed properly in certain areas. In some situations we're heavier in one area or the other, but to be resilient and to know that you have the staff that are there with you when it gets difficult. And shout out to our people. I mean, it still is, it's an ongoing stress test that we're all going through, but when it all started, to get through it and get through it in the way that we have, it's a real compliment to our people and the people you have here. So I would encourage that to anyone's business to really take a look at the people you have and see how they've performed during this ongoing stress test that we're all dealing with. So there's obviously more to come with it, but I look at it a lot that way, just to see how resilient is our team to handle different challenges, whether it be West Coast port issues that Jack had mentioned, that a lot of customers are looking at, to what we're dealing with every day, in the New York, New Jersey ports, where I've got 25 empty containers in my yard at our facility in Linden, New Jersey, because the port won't take the empties back. Seems kind of illogical. We want to get them back, and it's a challenge that it's just something I think you got to really look at your business.
That's a great way to put it. Anyone else, as we wrap up, want to talk about that, how they see resiliency moving forward?
We take a crack at it that from my perspective, and I've worked at this for years, this harkens back to one of the observations Dr. Suresh made during his comments in response to the question, that we should be looking for a better balance between leanness and agility. And I think what's happened, particularly here in the US, is that we've put an awful lot of effort into the lean part in the last several decades. Very, very lean, to the point where when the COVID came along, we didn't have the agility to respond. That's the basis of the problem. So we really need to start building up the agility side as part of that resiliency. And I think many companies have learned their lesson. They're going to run with higher inventories. They're going to be opening more inventory locations closer to customers. Boards of directors are willing to take higher logistics costs. The logistics costs in this country last year went up 22%. There probably aren't a lot of businesses on the line here who can say that their revenues went up 22% last year. They'd be doing cartwheels. But the point is, costs are up higher. They're not coming down anytime soon. So it says we're going to have to get used to living with higher costs. That's just a fact of life. So you've got to figure out a way to exist in this environment. And the message coming from business owners, executives, boards is that we understand the need for higher inventories and so on. We are willing to pay more. We have to pay more to stay competitive. It doesn't make sense to be lean if I've got no customers.
So the main takeaways that I'm hearing, agility, diversity, and where we want to come in is finding ways to partner and work together as a consortium whenever we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation. We are going to make sure that we send the recording out to our council members. So again, thank you to Dr. Suresh from the University of Buffalo, David Galanti from Speed Global Services, Mike Durkin from Kobe Inc., and Jack and Pooja from Supply Chain Optimizers. Thanks so much for starting early with us. And Doctor, thank you from tuning in from Singapore. Your time is greatly appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you. Nice meeting.
And,
Thanks.
and I also thank you. And I also want to thank our sponsors, as always, who make our work possible. Our title sponsor, Bank on Buffalo, our industry sponsors, National Grid, Harris Beach PLLC, Quadrant Biosciences, and our supporting sponsors, the Bondeal Group and Remedy Intelligent Staffing. And everyone, thank you for starting your day with us. Enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, and we will follow up with an email with this presentation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Jack.
See you, Alan.
Bye, David.
See you, Doctor. See you, Jack. Mike,
See you,
thank you.
David. Seth,
Thanks, Seth.
Take care,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks.
good luck, guys.
Thank you.
Nice job, everyone.
Thank you.